Pastor Neil, use mine.
I want to welcome you to our wonderful experience we're about to have this afternoon. We have some dynamic speakers. We want to thank our Social Action Ministry for making this possible. We are living in some crucial times, as we all know, and there's a great spirit of expectation in the air. But there are some practicalities that we need to just take care of, and so we want to ask you to maybe just do some FaceTime somebody or call somebody. Let me know that there's going to be a seminar here at Bedford Central Church that is going to be life-changing and life-transformative. So we welcome you to this time of reflection and pondering and questions. Have your questions. We want to have a prayer before we begin. Then we're going to turn over to a wonderful host of the evening, the convener, Sister Petula Henley, the director and leader of our Social Action Ministry here at Bedford Central. My name is Clive Neal. I'm the pastor, and so we welcome you from around the world who are joining us today in this very important forum. Let's pray together. Gracious God, we thank you that all things were made by you and for you, and that everything move and consistent have their being in you. So we ask now your presence just permeate this place, oh God, be in the minds, the hearts, and the attitude, and also, God, the seriousness of this critical time in which we live. We pray that we will take our responsibility, our rights and privilege seriously as we understand the moment in which we live. Be with our panelists this afternoon, and we pray for all those who are watching that something may trigger their commitment to you and to the cause and to the people, and most of all, God, to the communities in which we live and move each day. This we ask in Christ's name. God's people say, amen. Without much further ado, I want to turn it over to our great leader, our social action extraordinaire, Sister Petula Henley. From now, she will take us on to the journey of a lifetime.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Clive E. Neal. We are fortunate today to have with us, to my immediate left, Stephanie L. Zinnemann, who is the Democratic nominee for the 56th Assembly representing Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights. It is with a very long resume of equality and activism and a passion for civic engagement that Stephanie is now a candidate for the New York State Assembly representing, as I said earlier, Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights. As a Silver Life member and former civic engagement chair for the Brooklyn NAACP, Stephanie is always fighting for the betterment of her community, whether it's serving on the community advisory board of a local high school or registering hundreds of citizens to vote. For over a decade, she has demonstrated the skill and commitment to serve the district in a leadership role, and she is committed to creating opportunities and securing resources for our community. As the next Assembly member for the 56th Assembly District, she is ready to lead and ready to serve. Thank you for joining us, Stephanie. Then we have with us today from the Public Advocate's Office, Zamala Rose, who is the Deputy Public Advocate of Civic and Community Empowerment. Zamala is responsible for shaping the Office of the Public Advocate's programming and policies related to infrastructure for immigrant communities, electoral processes, democratic participation, community support, and civic engagement, including census outreach and inclusion and support for diverse populations. Prior to joining the Office of the Public Advocate, Zamala was and continues to be known as a community organizer, government, and non-for-profit professional who leads efforts in civic participation, workforce development, and anti-property initiatives. Her resume also is an extensive one, but we are summarizing just for today. So thank you so much, Zamala, for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
So today is the last day of early voting. After 8 days of early voting, the total cumulative check-ins for New York City is 977,763 votes cast. What is the significance of this? We'll start with the Assembly Lady-elect.
Well, good afternoon, Petula, and again, thank you very much for having me here today. To Pastor Neil, the shepherd of this church, I thank you also for your civic engagement and leadership in this area. Well, I think it's very significant. We have almost an eighth of New York City residents who have voted already. That really is a testament to the hard work that advocates like Jamila and others has done to make sure that we actually had early voting. If you remember in some of our previous elections, when we first implemented it, the turnout was low. And so I think it's very significant at this time that people are taking advantage of it because it really does signal the sea change that people want to see. If you think about some of the campaign slogans that are going on, we're fighting for the soul of our nation, and I absolutely believe that. I think that if you are of African descent at this particular time in this country, once again, you're feeling like your life does not matter, and that it is time for us all to band together to ensure that equality and equity actually becomes a fact, and that we are no longer an endangered species in the land of our birth or our chosen land. Because if you have come here from wherever you've come to make this your home, it is and you should be treated as a citizen. So I'm so inspired by my fellow New Yorkers, and I'm regular citizens, people who can't vote right now, and even the business community has really stepped up and said that this is a moment in time that we have to take back our country, and people are understanding the power does lie with the people, and we're going to claim our power and make a change come November 3rd.
Thank you, Stephanie. Zamala?
Hi, first just want to say thank you, Petula, and also to Pastor Clyde Neal. When I think about the fact that we have early voting now, you know, for me, it's a wonderful thing because there's so many states around this country who have implemented programs that increase access to the ballot for people. And when we look at those states, often we find that they are, the people who populate those states may be whiter and they may be wealthier. And then when we come to New York State, we find that our laws and policies around voting and democracy may not be as progressive, but that has been changing over the last 2 years. So to Stephanie's point, you know, as Black people and Black immigrants and people across the state of New York and across the country are getting ready to cast their votes in such a pivotal and critical election, now is our first time actually doing this during a presidential race. You know, and we've seen record turnout, like you mentioned, over 900,000 people, almost, I think it's over 1 million across the state of New York. And that's really, really important because having access to the ballot is one of the first ways that you can really express your rights as a citizen, whether you're naturalized or you were born here. And for people of color, it's even more important because in so many ways, whether it's like our poll sites being moved at the last minute or not understanding and not having the correct voter education, we don't get a chance to participate as much. And in New York State, like when we look at our participation rates, even in I think 2019 and in years prior, we don't participate in elections as frequently as other states do. Sometimes we're at 17.6%, like in 2019 for the non-presidential elections. So it's like when you have early voting, it allows more people to participate in the process. It allows more women to participate in the process. Many of us are heads of household. You know, maybe we're working on election day and having just one day to vote just isn't gonna cut it for us. you know, and then you have essential workers, people who work in grocery stores and places where, yes, the law says they can take time off, but the reality is they can't take time off, right? So early voting just expands access to all of those individuals, immigrants, people of color, essential workers, women who are heads of household, and anyone else who can't fit into that rigid 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Thank you so much, Zamala. And we really thank Zamala, Stephanie, and all of the organizations who fought for New York, and the senators and assembly representatives who fought for New York to implement early voting. As they said, even in a state like New York State and a city like New York City, I think we were 32nd state to join the early voting initiative. So we thank you for all of your hard work. So the next question is about safety. Some people have not yet gone to the polls because they still feel unsafe in the age of COVID. So for those who don't know what to expect, how are we staying safe in terms of health at the polls? If you've gone to the polls already, what are some of the guidelines that are put in place to protect our poll workers as well as our voters? Stephanie.
Well, part of my responsibility is to go around to actually inspect the polls. I'm privileged to do that as a candidate and a member of a local Democratic club. And so one of the first things that we did during early voting was just to, get up early on that first day of early voting and go to each one of the poll sites to ensure that what was put in place to protect the voters and protect the workers was actually happening. And I must say that 2 of the 3 sites that are in my community is definitely up to par. They had the distancing stickers on the ground leading up to the poll site, so it gave people the frame of mind that they were already, they were no longer on their own, their mask had to be in place, and then they were walking into a situation where there were going to be other people. Once you get inside the poll site, those stickers actually repeat. Each of the poll worker stations should be 6 feet apart. They now have instituted plexiglass. And so when you come to speak with, if you don't know your ED or AD, and you have to go to the information desk, and if you don't know your ED and AD, we need to talk about that. But if you have to go and ask for information, or you want to, or you have a question, there is a plexiglass covering in front of that separates you and the poll workers. The other thing is that they're completely masked. They have masks and they also have shields on their face. So for whatever reason, if it's a very tall person who's over the glass, the worker is still as well is covered. We just want to remind people that yes, we are still in COVID. So that means, what are you doing? You're coming with your mask as well. And you are making sure that if you're feeling unsafe, cover your hair. If you have a shield, wear your shields. Do what you can do to protect. There is hand sanitizer. They give you a pen to go away with, so you don't have to touch that as well. And when you get your sticker after you voted, you can just put there. So everything has been individualized for the protection of the public. But we want, again, for people to do their own due diligence and come ready to do that. And especially when you're outside and you have to wait on the line, even then, we can still social distance. I saw a lot of lines and people were standing right next to each other. That's not going to make the line move any quicker. So we just want to make sure that we kind of continue. If you can touch the person next to you or in front of you, behind you or in front of you, that means you're too close. So we need you to back up a little bit and just remind people that we all want to remain safe.
Thank you, Stephanie. Zamala, would you like to add?
That was pretty comprehensive, but I will just repeat and agree with Stephanie. Like, it's really important that you also take your health into your own hands, right? So the Board of Elections is doing everything that they can do to keep you safe with the masks and the shields and everything else. They're wiping down equipment frequently to make sure that it stays clean. But it's really important that we bring our good masks. If you're concerned, wrap your hair, put on a hat, something like that, and just make sure that you socially distance. At the end of the day, we're still in COVID. There are still hot spots around the city, so people just need to understand, what zone they're in, and also that the times are COVID times, but we'll get through this. And if you really feel so afraid, and that, or maybe you have recently come down with COVID, just know that there are other opportunities for you to, get your absentee ballot, a no excuse absentee ballot. You can mail that in, you can drop it off at the drop box, and take advantage of all the ways possible to vote if you cannot do it in person. That's all I will reiterate.
Okay, so before we move on, I just wanted to ask folks, if you had a question, please type it in the chat in Zoom or online on Facebook. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible towards the end, but please put your questions, comments, concerns, and we will try our best to answer each and every one. So I'm going to ask one question to Stephanie and one to Zamala. Stephanie, you spoke about knowing your ED and your AD.
Yes.
So talk to the people. How does that look? How does that work? And right after Zamala, could you outline every possible way that you can vote between today and Tuesday? All right?
Okay. So your election district, your ED, and your assembly district, your AD, tells you who your representatives are. It is based on where you live. It is very important information to know, because I'm sure everybody on this panel has received a text or a phone call or an email that says, who am I voting for? We should not be in a situation where a day before or 2 days before an election, we're asking the question of who we should vote for. We should already know who our representatives are, from the very local level of our district. Well, no, I'll go lower than that. Your county committee people, your district leaders, then your city council, your borough president, your assembly person, your state representative, your U.S. senator, different from your state senator, and then, of course, your member of Congress and and the president of the United States. So that, that's 7 layers of government. Everyone has a different function. Every office has a different function. One of the things that we do is try to have, at the NAACP and other organizations, really have a conversation with people about understanding where you live and who represents you, because that determines what type of services that you will or will not get. If you're not in conversation with your elected officials, then you're probably dissatisfied with what's going on in your neighborhood, and you don't want to wait until the next election to try to correct that. I always say to people that when you vote for someone, it is an invitation to have a relationship with them. It is not an invitation to say goodbye, I'll see you in 2 years or 4 years. And so we want people to know this information so that they can see and track what services are coming into their community, who represents them, if they're doing a good job for them. Are they showing up and voting for things that are important to you? Do they support a particular issue that you don't support? These are all of the things that can be tracked if you know your assembly district and your election district. And then there's your judicial and others as well. We won't go that far. But at least when it comes to the ED and AD, that's going to allow you to walk into the poll with freedom, go to your table, you know exactly where you need to vote. Now we're computerized, so you can just kind of walk up, and they're very good now. You have the little card, and they just scan you in. That's good, but it kind of takes away the responsibility of you knowing where you belong.
So first, I know that we should already know our ED and AD, but for those of us who are now becoming civically engaged and would like to, vote for
their candidate, their representative?
For their representatives, where should they go? What should they do right now?
NewYorkPollSiteLocator.com. It's my favorite site. Once you put in your address, all of that information pops up, and every representative, whether it is your congressional reps, your state reps, your city reps, they're all listed there along with your ED and your AD. It tells you your poll site, it tells you your early voting site, it tells you who your judicial reps are. I mean, so this is the site of choice when you want to find out
Could you
where you
repeat
belong.
that slowly?
nypollsitelocator.gov. No. It's not
.com?
gov. It's .com. It's .com. But now you can just go to Vote NYC, and it'll just take you right there.
Yes.
Just vote.nyc. Now, they made everything easier. And I'm happy about that, too. I think we're doing a lot better with not having so many sites to go to. Everything is in one place. You can order your ballot, and you can find out where you go to vote and who represents you, and register to vote all in the same place. So that's good.
Awesome. So if you missed that, it's vote.nyc. Any information you need about this election, vote.nyc. If you're not sure where your early vote site is, vote.nyc. If you're not sure if your November 3rd poll site is, vote.nyc. If you're not sure who your representatives are, vote.nyc. Thank you, Stephanie. Zamala.
Sure. So I agree. I cannot express anymore how important it is for people to know who their representatives are. Even the fact that we're able to vote early in New York State is because of our state legislature, the people in the Assembly and the Senate. So you need to know who's working on your behalf and who's not working on your behalf, and whose door to knock down, and who to put in office and who not to put back into office. So it's really, really important that we understand those basic civic principles. But also, when it comes to voting in New York City right now, the first thing that I'd like to talk about, for those of you who actually applied for and received your absentee ballot in the mail, the deadline, for applying for that was October 27th by mail. So if you have not applied yet, I'm not talking to you yet. I'm only talking to the people who have already applied and you are in receipt of your absentee ballot. If you have it, you need to drop it off at a poll site right now. It's a little late in the game to drop it inside the mailbox. It should be postmarked by November 3rd, but you know what? If you have it on your person, sign it, date it, make sure that your signature matches how you normally sign, and bring it to a poll site and drop it in the secure drop box. The other way that you can vote, of course, is in person on Election Day. So you could show up at your poll site, whatever that poll site is. If you go to vote.nyc, you'll figure it out. And then, of course, like we were talking about earlier, early voting is still in effect. Up until 5 p.m. today, right?
5 p.m.
It has been extended by an hour because of the overwhelming turnout all across the city. So it was until 4, but now it is extended until 5 p.m. today. I encourage you, if you want to vote in person at your poll site on the machine with your ballot, you can go today up until 5 o'clock p.m. So you can do that. If you have the ballot in hand, you can drop it off at the same poll site, either on Election Day or today. The sooner the better. And if you can't do that today, then make sure on November 3rd, you head into that poll site and you cast your vote. And that is what I would tell people. So Saints, make sure you have that website, that's vote.nyc.
Thank you. And so today the polls close at 5.
At 5 p.m. It's the last day of early voting.
Last day
Let's
of
make
early
it count.
voting.
And if you don't want to come out in the rain, you can give it to a neighbor to drop off for you. They
Thank
just
you.
can't go with maybe 30 or 40 people from your building, but they can drop off 1 or 2.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Desiree Hall. I have difficulty convincing my 40-year-old son to vote. He says it wouldn't make a difference to him who's in power because nothing changes. Who would like to tackle?
Oh, I think we both probably do, but I'll start out with saying the first campaign I worked on, I was a campaign manager, and we won that election by 66 votes. That's less than most people who live in a building or live on a block. So every vote does count. And I know it sounds cliche, but it's absolutely true. I've lived that through every election that I've been in. I think that people who say it's not going to change anything have to recognize that the power actually lies with the people. the average representative represents over 100,000 people, 80,000 people. So just do the math. That one person is never going to be the end-all and be-all to one person. Elections, our democracy, and I like to use the term participatory democracy, means that everybody has to participate, everybody has the role. The elected official's job is to represent the people. You can't represent people that you don't know and that you don't communicate with, which is why I say when you vote for someone, you have to have a relationship with them. Whether you drop them a note, whether you send them an email, whether you communicate with them via telephone, or you talk to them on social media, your job is to talk about what are the needs in your community. You cannot assume that people see what you see, because only you are living your particular truth. And so you have to take that step out and have the conversation. You know, I always harken back when people tell me, say that Barack Obama didn't do enough for black people when he was in office. So I always ask them the next question of, well, what did you ask him to do? And so it's usually silent after I ask that question, because if you can show me the letter when he told you to kick rocks and he wasn't going to help you with that particular issue, then we can actually have a conversation. So for her 40-year-old son, I would just really say, change comes from community and from the people. The elected official is there to help facilitate the change, to help to ensure that if there's funding that's needed for a project to fix something, then that's their role. If there's a new piece of legislation that's required for change, then that's the elected official's role. If we need to amend the legislation, that's the elected official's role. Their job is to take your concerns to that body, that legislative body, and then do what they need to do to make it happen. It is not something that's just going to happen, because when you get into office, there are people who are called lobbyists, and there are other concerned citizens, and guess what they do? They come and they speak their truth, and they demand what it is they want for themselves. So I just encourage him to just think about the things that he would like to do to improve his community, and then please come out, have a conversation, work toward what it is that you want to see in your community. You just can't leave it up to somebody else, because if you do, they're going to get what they want. They're not going to get what you want.
And I'd like to add to that a little bit. Just, understand that power is always in the hands of the people. And to the extent that we protest and fight and lobby for what we want, that's the extent that we will get it, right? And so what has often been done and historically been done across the country in communities of color is that people have suppressed our right to vote, right? So whether it's, discarding our votes, creating poll taxes, or different ways that we can't get to the polls, or not having enough voting sites so the lines are too long. For years, historically, our rights to vote have been suppressed, and that is because voting does matter and it can change things. And the reason it changes things is because it puts people in power who are tuned in to your needs. So if you can put people in power who are already listening to you, and unfortunately our system, the way it currently works, a lot of times they're only talking to the most engaged citizens, they're not talking to people who aren't engaged, but to the extent that you can engage yourself in the process so that elected officials who you put in power are listening to you, that is when you can see things change. And I'll just give a couple of examples, because Stephanie spoke about a lot. But like, for instance, in New York City, we have a large immigrant population. Many of these immigrants, because of their status, were not able to get driver's license. Because of the lobbying efforts and the efforts of immigrant people in New York City and New York State, we were able to pass a green light law, which now allows undocumented citizens to get driver's license so they can provide for their families. Another thing that was able to be done many years ago that some people don't even remember, young people, specifically Black and brown youth, were getting locked up and criminalized and put in detention centers upstate New York. We overhauled the juvenile justice system because of our state legislatures. That could not have been done before we put people in office who represented us, who understood the plight of young Black men. Another thing that happened recently, and Stephanie probably knows a little bit more about this, is we did some changes to bail reform. Of course, there were some rollbacks, but we were able to, take into consideration the fact that young men like the Exonerated Five, young men like Khalif Browder are getting criminalized and locked up in a criminal justice system that does not serve them. But it takes our efforts and people who look like us, who respect us enough and believe in our humanity, to pass laws that amplify the voices of these people and come back in a redemptive way to save them. So even as we're talking to the church and Christians and this woman's 40-year-old son, it's really our responsibility to fight for justice. And we can do that through our votes, we can do that through our protests, we can do that so many different ways, but really it starts with a vote. And so it's so important because none of those laws would be possible if we didn't start with putting people in power who actually thought that we were human in the first place.
Absolutely. So,
Just another one I want to lift
yes.
up. Now, we are now registering 16 and 17-year-olds. So that I'm sure you have a nephew, niece, a little cousin somewhere, sister or brother, that now can be pre-registered to vote so that when they're 18, they can just walk into the poll site. And so we're giving the power to such a young group of people. We want our older citizens to be able to help lead them the way. Discuss with them how they can get involved. Discuss with them just how powerful their voice is. And so, yes, I would love to meet him so we can continue to have this conversation because this is one of my specialties. Nobody likes to have the conversation. I was listening to someone else this morning and they said they were tired of having a conversation with people about why it's important to vote. And it's one of it was Pastor Neil actually this morning's service. But it is one of the things that I love to do because I spend time and I have a exhaustive list as to why people should vote. But it all stems from you understanding your power and using it.
Yes, and so definitely I know you are very passionate about ensuring that we have our young people at the table in terms of what affects them and what they want to see. And so we're looking forward to you uplifting the voices of the youth. Well, you have already done so, but continue to do so when you get into office. Thank you, Stephanie. So there also were more comments on Facebook of grandparents and parents articulating that they're having difficulties with, their son or their grandsons encourage them. So hopefully after today's seminar that they would be convinced that this is important and this is how they can be heard or part of the way that they can be heard.
But they could also just ask them a question. So there's two questions I'd like to ask people. Well, if you don't vote, what's the alternative? And the second thing is, and if you can articulate the alternative, then we can have a conversation about that too. But the other thing, and more important, is what is happening in your community that you would like to change, and what are you willing to do to help with that change? Now, people usually can tell me what they want to change, but then when you ask them if they're going to help,
That's a different
it's
story.
a different story. But I want to encourage that conversation because I know a lot of people have a problem with that because they don't think that they have the power to change. And so, I like to kind of walk them through, just the simple act of having a meeting or requesting or sending a question or showing up to volunteer somewhere really does have the power to change things. Mm-hmm. And they're just very small incremental steps that you can take in order to participate in this democracy and see the change that you want to see. So don't give up on them. Just invite them to the table. Tell them to show up at a community board meeting, a block association meeting, go to your local school and find out what's going on with the kids. Whatever it is your passion. You don't think there's enough rec spaces in the community. Whatever it is that you think that our community needs, you have to help us step up and make it happen.
Exactly. Our elected officials can't do the work without you. All right? And so I have a question, but before I get to that question, what's on the ballot? And by that, we know we've been talking about the presidential election. This has been the main focus, but there are other positions on the ballot, and I've been getting phone calls while people in the polls state who to vote for, so that goes back to not knowing who represents you, but what's on the ballot and why is each position important?
Sure, I can start talking about some of the things on the ballot. So presidential elections are important, but at the end of the day, how many of us will ever get a chance to talk to the President of the United States, right? So, of course, they're responsible for international policy and governance for the entire country, but really there's a phrase that says all politics are local, and it's so important that we participate not just voting for whether it's Trump or Biden or whomever, but that we're looking at what's on the ballot, which right now is Congress, right? And I'll touch on that, and I'm going to leave some for Stephanie to talk about as well. The reason Congress is so important is because on the federal level, they are advocating for you for federal policy. Federal policy can include anything from food stamps to workforce development programs, money for education, money for housing, affordable housing, NYCHA, all those types of things. Our federal legislature, which is Congress, are making those decisions on an everyday basis. The Affordable Care Act, we've heard a lot about that. They're advocating on that. And even for the census, our federal legislators are doing that. That's what Congress's role is for. So a lot of times, even when we have a president in place, and let's say that president, we have checks and balance in our country, and that president wants to do things or pass executive laws or things like that. Congress is also, and the Senate, are those institutions that can push back. We can pass laws, we can, do things that can hold a check and balance to the president. And so that's on the ballot this year. Everybody is going to be voting for Congress. Then we have our state legislature, which is Senate and Assembly, which I'm going to let Stephanie get into in a little bit later. But then we also have, in some cases, judicial people on the ballot. So civil courts, which is like small claims, and looking at some of these local civil matters, not criminal court, but civil court. And then in Queens, I don't know how many people in this church live in Queens, you're also voting for Queensborough president. So just remember that. There's like 3 or 4 candidates, I believe, for Queensborough president, and then we have a special election in Brooklyn and Bushwick where there is 1 candidate. So each of those positions represent a jurisdiction within New York City that you may live in, and those are the individuals who are actually making laws on a daily basis that will impact your schools, your roads, your hospitals, and everything else around you. And I'll let Stephanie get into the state legislature because she's about to be right up in there.
But I just want to put a pin in something you said, and it harkens back to the conversation about your election district and your assembly district. A lot of people, they may have or see someone on television that they want to support, and it's like, I went to vote for Jamani, and he wasn't on the ballot. Well, it's not his turn. It's a city, it's a city position. So you have to know in what year, if you're voting for a federal and state, which this year represents, or the city, which next year represents. And so, yes. The member of Congress this year is so important as well because of COVID and so many other things. We are looking for those federal dollars. And remember, your federal dollars, where does the federal government get its money from? From your taxes.
From us. Right?
So it is your money that the members of Congress are having a conversation about how they're going to spend it, and then, of course, what money they're going to send to the state level, to New York State. And so if you have a president who is saying that, I don't want to represent, I don't want to send resources to one state versus another because of their political party, we have a problem. People should be up in arms about that because that should not be the case at all. And so even as legislators, we need to have relationships with legislators in other bodies. We need to understand that we need to know what the mindset of our federal representative is so that we can get a heads up about what's going to be coming down to the state level. And so right now on the ballot is our state Senate, which is the upper house of the legislative body, and then of course the New York State Assembly. And so I like to say to people, when you walk out your door, everything that you can see, smell, touch, and feel basically is governed by either the state or the city. And so you really should pay attention to that. $170 billion is the budget for New York State. Not million, billion. And so where does that money go? What does it support? When you think about how, rents are so high that people have to leave, right? Where people don't have medical care. Why is, in some cases, the state able to help? In other cases, they are not. And so I'm a budget hawk. I'm always looking at the money. I'm always following the money. When you think about the money that's spent on education, but students are still being undereducated, all of those things we need every citizen to pay attention to. We need you to demand where the money is coming from. There were 100 agencies on the state level. Most people can't name 5. And so you need to know what those agencies do, how they impact your life, how your state rep is or is not overseeing what they're doing, because they should be, in terms of how it impacts your district. Do we need it? Don't we need it? And if we do and it's not functioning properly, what are we doing together as citizens? Because at the end of the day, you may be an elected official, but you're still a citizen. You're still a voter. You still live in a district. You live in a neighborhood that needs services and needs assistance. And so we want people to really understand just what each of the levels of government are responsible for, and we want them to get engaged in the conversation of where our resources go. And voting is the way you do that.
Thank you, Stephanie. And so we're coming close to the close. We have a few more minutes left. And so I'm going to try to get to some of the questions. But before we do that, the Attorney General spoke or shared a video about the affidavit ballot. Could you tell us more about that? What's an affidavit ballot, and when do you use that?
Well, the affidavit ballot, and everybody should know about this. If you go to the poll and you know that you're registered to vote and you always vote and they can't find you in the system, you always ask for affidavit ballot, because you want to make sure, you never want to leave there and say they couldn't find me, somebody made a mistake, any of those things. Demand your affidavit ballot, fill it out, you sign it, you put it in an envelope, and then at the end, when the election is over, the Board of Election has those in envelopes. Tula knows this because she helped count during the primary. So you had your mail-in ballots you had to count. You have your overseas ballots, your military ballots, and the affidavits. And so nobody should walk away from a poll site without having cast their ballot. And what they will do is, this is the time where you want to err on the side of inclusion. We make sure that we do that so nobody's vote is disenfranchised. So for instance, if somebody ended up having a affidavit and voted, one gets thrown out. You do find it, but the affidavit is to be absolutely sure that person's vote does count, and it's there. And if, of course, the person is not registered to vote, it's thrown out. So.
Quick question. So is it the responsibility of the poll workers or the site coordinator to suggest that you fill out an affidavit ballot, or you?
It is a part of their training.
Yes.
But we always tell people.
Okay.
The same way I tell people when you register to vote, or if you fill out any legal document, take a copy of it. Always have your own copy, whether it's on your phone or you go to a fax machine, so you have your proof that you took care of your business. And so an affidavit is just that. You're swearing that you are registered to vote and you have the right to cast your vote in this election.
So just to reiterate,
okay.
If you go to the polls and they can't find you, and they did not suggest to you to fill out an affidavit ballot, it is your right to demand one, correct?
Yes. Correct, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And on that note, I have a senior or several seniors who had issues during early vote. I have Sister Lola, who borrowed a friend's cane or walking stick because she was told that you won't be allowed to go into the senior line unless you had a cane or a walker or a wheelchair. We also have Brother George, who's also a senior, George McLeod, the building manager of our church, who was over 65 and who was told to step out of the senior line because he didn't have a cane or a walker. What is the rule? And if the rule's not being followed, what is the protocol for making a report?
So, the rule, I can't say that there is actually a rule, but there is a provision for seniors. In the event that you are in a line and it is too long and you cannot stand, or if you have a disability, you can be moved up in the line and brought inside so that you can cast your vote. There are some situations where we have seen, I know we've heard in Park Slope of some poll site workers who were not, who needed some assistance with the guidance that they were giving the general public as they walked into the poll site. We recommend that people tell the poll site workers what their rights are, that they can go inside, they are a senior, they cannot stand, or they cannot, walk, or whatever that is. And if there is additional issues, to contact the Election Protection Hotline. They can also get in touch with our office. Our office, you can reach us at, well, I'm not sure if a senior would be emailing, but they could reach us at gethelp@advocate.nyc.gov. And there are probably some additional technical ways that they could also put in a complaint. Stephanie, I'm not sure if you have any additional information on that specific thing, but we are working on clarifying guidance and rules on seniors and people with disabilities who are waiting on lines. That is something that post this election you'll see resurface as well, because there really does need to be clear guidance across the board. And better training.
Well, there is a separate line for people with disabilities. I always say to anyone, if you're having any problem at your site, ask to talk to the site inspector. That person has the power in their mind. And everybody has a different management style. There's certainly guidance, there's a whole manual, and there's several trainings for people, but people receive information differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so site inspectors have the ability to make that call. If you know that, even someone who is fit, I represent a group of age-friendly women who are very fit. However, after 2 hours on the line, that's not manageable. And so that site inspector has the ability to say, okay, we have room on the disability line, and we're gonna come and pull out, and I've seen it. They come and they
Mm-hmm.
pull folks out of the line, and they have them, have the special access, as they should. And so should we have to codify it in law? We will if we have to, but certainly that's within the power of the site inspector to do.
I know sometimes when Pastor Hill is preaching, he would say, not at Bedford Central. So I'm going to preface this statement by saying, not in a 56 AD. Okay. But on the first day of early voting, I also had a call from a church member who lives in Queens, who said there was an 85-year-old who was online, and the poll workers refused to bring that person up. And so I immediately went to St. John's Rec, which is one of the poll sites in our area, and as soon as I got there, a poll worker was outside making the announcement, if you're 65 years and older and you would like to, because sometimes, folks want to stay with their family members, etc., and you would like to, follow me. If you have an absentee ballot in your hand, follow me. So it would be great for this to be streamlined, just to make the voting process easier for a more vulnerable population, whether or not they have a disability.
Well, one of the things I just want to say about that also, and I don't know if people noticed it, but this year there was more advocacy around asking people to step up and volunteer to be poll workers. We need additional poll workers. It's a nice piece of change to work both early voting and on election day. We want more young people. We spent a lot of time this year recruiting 17-year-olds to be poll workers because we want to get them in so they continue this work, because it is a grueling day for somebody that's a little older. My mom used to do it. Now she's 78, so she's retired from it. But we need poll workers, and we need people who can go to the training and do what that young person was, that person was doing, was outside, remembering the training, remember to engage, And remember that we want everybody to vote. We don't want to make voting difficult, right? So being on a 4-hour line in the rain, and whether or not you have a cane or not, is a difficult thing. People should exercise their power in that situation and make it accessible. But the other thing is, this is a plea to all the voters that are going to be voting today and on Tuesday. If you see an 85-year-old on the line, I'm sure we all remember our training, and that says you're going to ask the question and you're going to let that person go to the front of the line. You know, you can escort that person up to the front of the line and say that it's time for them to vote. I think that we all have to pitch in.
Oh, definitely. You don't have to wait for a poll worker to come out.
That's right.
You take the initiative and say, come with me, and you take them to the front of the line.
That's right. Ms. Irma gets the vote first.
So we're just going to take one more question. Super Saved sent a question saying that it was articulated that it will take a few days after the election day to tell who will be president. Why is that?
That's because we have to count all the votes that are coming in. So typically on election night, we're able to call the election. We've seen, I mean, in New York State alone, I can't even speak about the other states, but in New York State alone, we typically have, like, I think less than 4% of mail-in ballots from everybody who has voted. And what we're seeing this year is so many people voting by mail. So there's just so many votes that have been casted that are not done on the electronic machines that have to actually be tallied after the polls close, and that counting starts. It didn't start yesterday or the day before. It doesn't start when we start early voting. We start that counting later. So we do have to wait for those ballots to be counted, respect people's right to vote, and that's one of the reasons why we'll see election results come in a little later than typically on election night. And so people should just be patient, but just know that means that democracy is in play, and we are doing what we're supposed to do, which is counting every vote, the ones that have been mailed in, casted overseas, whatever. Stephanie, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, just a little bit about the internals. If you've ever gone to the Board of Election and counted votes, you know that it is a step-by-step process. They take meticulous care to ensure that everybody is counted. So the first thing that happens when the mail comes in is the mail has to be sorted. So it's sorted by zip codes, and then it's sorted by what? ED and AD, right? And then people are assigned to those election districts, and then they have to start to open up every envelope. And they have to inspect every envelope, because people, and if you haven't voted yet by mail or in person, please, if you have a manifesto, don't write it on your ballot. If you want to write somebody in, that's fine, but please only write it in on the designated space. Remember to sign your name. Remember to, in every space that it asks for it. A lot of ballots were thrown out in the primary because people forgot to sign and seal both of the envelopes. And so your ballot, treat it like your Bible. You're not going to write all your favorite book. You're not going to write in it. You're only going to respond in the designated areas. And so once those ballots are inspected, then they are hand counted, and then they put them in the machine for the final count. So it is a very meticulous step-by-step process, and that's another reason why it takes long. And we can continue to receive them now until they have to be postmarked, by election day, but we can receive them for up to 7 days here, right? It's changed in other places. And so ballots will still come in, and they'll have to be added to those EDs, and then inspected, hand counted, and then placed in the machine for the final tally. So that's why it takes a little while.
So you actually answered the next question, which was, can you write in a candidate, whether on your absentee ballot or your regular ballot? So you answered that question. Yes, you can, but only in the designated area, correct?
Only in the designated area, because they will throw your ballot out.
Okay.
If you want to put all the Disney characters down there, just, make the joke, make a copy, and then, doodle at home. But your real ballot that you're going to mail in, only in a designated space, because it will end up in the circular file.
Okay, so we're going to take one last question and then closing remarks from each of you. And on Facebook, the question is, what is the difference between the Working Family Party and the Democratic Party?
That's a good question. So in our state, well, all across the country, we have multiple parties. The Working Families Party is one of them. It is considered a progressive party in New York State. People do run on that line, and often what you will see, a candidate could run on multiple lines, especially in New York State. You can run on the Working Families Party. You could also run on the Democratic Party. Independents, Green Party, there's a whole bunch of parties. Like even when you do your voter registration, some of us may have been registered to vote for a long time, so we might not remember, but when you look at a voter registration application, it has at least, I think, 6 or 7 parties that you could join, and if you don't want to join any party, then you're considered an independent. So, Working Families Party is a party that you can vote for candidates on. It's a line that will be on the ballot. So just for people who are going to the polls, when you pick up your ballot, just be aware you will see some of the same individuals on the Democratic line as you will see on the Working Families Party line as well. It's your choice as to how you would like to vote and on which line you would prefer to vote if you are voting for those candidates. Otherwise, you could look at candidates on any of those lines that are available, but that is pretty much the difference. It is a political party. They typically represent progressive candidates who stand for very progressive ideals, and oftentimes those candidates may also be Democrats.
All right, any closing remarks or reminders?
Reminders, I would say vote, 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 vote. Bring your grandmother, bring your cousin, your nephew, your children, and vote. This is a historic time in our country. We also have people, we have options on the ballot for people who represent, who look like they're from specific groups that may represent us, whether it's immigrant communities or people of color. We have a historic time where we're celebrating the 100 year of women's suffrage. It's the centennial year. There is a woman on the ballot. There's so many different reasons why you could go to the polls. I'm not telling you who to vote for. I'm just saying there's so many reasons why we should all be excited about this particular historic election. And I would just encourage everyone to, dig deep, look into the tenets that you live your life by, the pillars that you live your life on, and how you make your decisions, and then walk into your ballot box and make that decision, make it a conscientious decision, and vote for what you think would be the right thing to do, which is standing for justice and equity for all.
Stephanie, final remarks?
Vote, vote, vote. Vote like your life depended on it, because it does. Pastor Neal said to me, can you underscore why this particular election is so much more important than other ones? And I just want to say to people that we have lost, one of the reasons is that we've lost nearly 250,000 of our citizens. I don't know 250,000 people, and to know that they have died because we have failed to prepare our country, respect science, respect the experts, to put protocols in place that are within our power so that people can be safe, to me, is more than enough reason to go to the poll. I can certainly talk about the history of African descendant people in this country and the reasons why we should vote just out of respect for our ancestors, but we always focus in on those who died for our right to vote. But I want to talk about those people who lived for the right to vote, because they are the ones who kept our democracy going. Mm-hmm. They were the ones who showed up to a meeting, who banded together in community to take care of citizens when the government couldn't show up, until they could go to the government and demand those resources for our community. So we are voting for our lives. We are fighting for our lives, and this is a serious thing. If you are feeling discouraged and you cannot find it in your heart to find a reason to vote, then go because your mother and your grandmother asked you to. Go because there's some young person that's looking at you, and they need an example as to why this is important. At this point, if you can't find the reason, just please trust the fact that in recent history, You have not seen this many people out in the polls voting. You have not seen the city, the state, and the federal government coming together with all sorts of ad campaigns to get people to vote. I mean, even stores and businesses have gotten on the bandwagon of everybody needs to vote. So people are hurting, they know they need change, and we need to do this. And the last thing that I just want to say is, what happens after Election Day? On November 4th, everybody needs to get up, and everybody needs to identify something in their community that they want to change. And then you need to ask someone, if you don't know, about how you can go about making that change. I don't want you to just be very happy that you voted on Election Day or for early voting. We need each and every one of you to be a part of our democracy, and we need to pull more people in, and whether that's helping them getting their citizenship or helping someone graduate from college and or high school and understand the importance of being civically engaged, whatever it is, do something to help this nation. We cannot continue to have just a few people carrying the load. The load is getting too heavy. We are burning people out. We have lost so many people over the last couple of years. So we need more soldiers in this army. We need you. So I'm looking forward to seeing each and every one of you on November 4th, whether it's on a Zoom or on social media or in the street. We need to band together to do this work.
And there you have it, live from Bedford Central Presbyterian Church. Souls to the polls. If you have not yet voted, you have until 5 o'clock today to go to your early vote site. If not, we'll see you on Election Day. We are grateful for Zamala Rose, Deputy Public Advocate of Civic and Community Empowerment, and Stephanie L. Zinneman, Democratic nominee for the 56th Assembly District. Thank you both. God bless you. Have a wonderful Sunday afternoon.
Thank you.